Down to Earth Program 216.
Many of us who live in urban or suburban areas have the idea that it would be nice someday to have a few acres in the country, maybe raise a few chickens and some cows. That is a nice idea, but it does require a little advanced planning. My guest has thoughts on this. Wood Jenkins is an extension specialist at USDA. Wood, are there any loopholes in this idea of becoming a hobby farmer?
No, there, like everything else, there's a lot more underneath than appears on the surface, and planning is a part of this whole action here on the part of people who want to move to a hobby farm.
What are some of the factors that people need to consider?
Well, if you're moving out on a hobby farm, then it has to be that. The problem many times is they try to make something out of it that's not possible for several reasons. One of them is capital, another are the pollution or environmental considerations.
What about the idea that somebody wants to raise a few chickens and make some money off of it? Poultry has become a very sophisticated business in recent years.
Very commercialized and very technical. Now, we have no qualms with people who want to do this as long as they don't try to make something out of it that can't be.
So approach it with the idea that you're doing this for the recreational and the aesthetic value and not as a money-making venture unless you have a good, solid knowledge base.
Yes, and on top of this, you have to know what the circumstances or the situation is that you're going to operate under. And this is where some of these zoning ordinances and local regulations come into play. A person should know what they are before they try to do some of these things like high-intensity livestock or poultry units on a small area.
Do most municipalities have zoning regulations that state that if you're going to have livestock, you've got to have a minimum number of acres and you cannot have a livestock density that exceeds X number of chickens or cows per acre?
These are in the process of being developed in accordance with state regulations, and the beauty of this is that you should know before you make a purchase of what you can do and what you can't do and still be a good neighbor. Now, when you concentrate animals or any kind of living organism, you have to have a good management program in order to be a good neighbor.
What about some of the environmental factors or considerations?
Well, we have odors and dust and noise and runoff from fields that can contribute to environmental pollution unless we have a good management program.
In addition to the legal and the environmental and the fact that people do need to have a certain amount of knowledge to begin with, it seems to me there's probably kind of an abstract area, a social area that you move into a small town or a rural area, and if you come from an urban or a suburban area, you are something of an outsider.
This is true, and this social factor is a real important one. And the thing that we're trying to caution folks about is know what they're going to be dealing with, what they can't do, and still be a good neighbor. You know, they say good fences make good neighbors, and this is also true with good management programs, regardless of what type of livestock.
One final question. That person who is entertaining the idea of getting a little weekend home or retirement home, something like this, where should they begin?
First, they need to look at the area and go right to the spot, check with local authorities, and the extension people also probably knowledgeable in this area as well.
Thank you very much. Wood Jenkins, Extension Specialist. Hobby farming, a good idea, but it does require some advanced planning. I'm Don Elder for the Department of Agriculture in Washington.
Down to Earth Program 217.
After corn, the soybean is our #2 cash crop in this country. Presently, only a small percentage of our soybean acreage is under irrigation, yet there's a growing interest in irrigation of soybean fields. Here with me to look at this is Randy Corley, Extension Economist. Randy, why the interest in irrigation?
Well, irrigation is an important increment in the production of soybeans or any other crop for that matter. The idea is to be able to irrigate in such a way that you can profitably, and we might say underline profitably, increase the yield of their soybeans.
Let's take a look at some of the types of irrigation systems that are being used.
Yeah, here we have the end of a center pivot type of irrigation that's becoming quite common in the plain states. There's an aerial view of it. You can see where they go around in a circle, and where the beans are, then they grow quite well.
Randy, don't we have some waste in the corners on a center pivot system?
Yes, this is somewhat of an older system. Some of the newer systems have an arm that swings out to even irrigate the corners. Here's just a quite common type of sprinkler system that's used in soybeans as well as a number of other crops. In some of the delta states, southern states, furrow irrigation is also used. And then, of course, in the delta states where soybeans are rotated with rice, use the flood system.
Randy, what factors need to be considered in selecting a certain type of irrigation system?
Well, there are two or three things. Primarily, the type of terrain that you have, whether you can use a flood system, whether you can use a furrow system, whether it's level land, how much effort, expense it takes to prepare the land, what type of soil you have, a variety of conditions of this sort, as well as quality of water.
Now, what about the cost factor? Some of these systems, like a center pivot system that is actually built into place, can be very costly.
It is very costly. For one thing, you've got to dig a well. If the water table is pretty deep, then you have to go quite a number of feet. Plus the length and the pipe, all of the, just the actual irrigation equipment itself is expensive.
Now, what happens if all of your neighbors decide to put in an irrigation system too? You've got to have a pretty good water table to handle all this.
The source of water, the quantity of water is quite important, and where a number of people use center pivot irrigation systems, they do over a period of time use.
What major producing areas of the United States might be best suited for irrigation of soybeans?
Well, I think any area can be suitable for irrigation, because if irrigation is used correctly, it supplements the natural rainfall and the natural moisture in many of the areas where soybeans are produced.
Can you see a trend in this direction in the future?
Yes, I think there's a trend in that direction. Here again, if they can increase the yield profitably, and also it gives them the opportunity to increase the quality control of their crop as they grow throughout the year. They can supply the water at that important time when they need to have the water for, say, pod set, blooming, or whatever the situation is in the crop.
Thank you very much. Randy Corley, Extension Economist, taking a look at irrigation of soybeans and what this can do for yield. I'm Don Elder, reporting for the Department of Agriculture in Washington.
Down to Earth Program 218.
Our history shows us that transportation was a key factor in developing agriculture within the United States. Transportation which enabled us to move crops and livestock from the key producing areas to our domestic and overseas markets. And transportation is still an important factor today. My guest is Extension economist Randy Corley. Randy, what are the major concerns about agricultural transportation today?
Well, I guess probably the major concern right now is the fact that with undergoing changes that are taking place, such as fewer railroads, the condition of the roads and so forth, that we have adequate transportation for moving our agricultural inputs, such as fertilizer and so forth, into the farm areas and being able to move the agricultural products out to the consuming areas, and at the same time providing adequate transportation for the many people that live in the rural communities.
How do our railroads and our dependence upon railroads today compare with, say, the turn of the century, 75 years ago?
Well, we depended a great deal on railroads 75 years ago because we didn't have very good farm roads in many cases. We depend upon the railroads a great deal today. The situation may be a little more different in the sense that we have trucks and we can transport a lot of agricultural products great distances by truck. We have waterways, but still the railroad is a very important part of getting the food and fiber that's produced on our farms to either our domestic or export markets.
What is being done to improve our rail system?
Well, a lot of change is undergoing in the form of new equipment, such as larger, heavier cars. We have faster equipment for faster delivery of many of the perishable products to get them to market. Just a variety of things of this sort, technical things, management, rate changes and this type of thing as well.
What is the role of the individual state in rail planning?
Well, this has come on in fairly recent years, you might say, through the 4R Regional Rail Revitalization and Regulatory Reform Act of 1976. That assigns specifically to the states the responsibility of developing adequate state rail plans, you might say in conjunction with the highway system that they have in the state, to provide adequate both transportation for the rural areas and the urban areas as well.
Is the idea that these individual state plans, say in a given region of the United States, will be coordinated to come up with, say, a regional plan and then maybe a national plan?
Right now, the emphasis is on having the states to provide preliminary rail plans, which will be altered over the next few years. At the same time, I think it's very difficult for a state to plan a rail system without at the same time looking at their highway system, because it becomes one of a coordinating type of situation where if you have one type of transportation but not the other, then is that one that you do have adequate to take care of the transportation needs of the state.
So the idea is to coordinate all facets of our transportation, highways and trucks and rail, and I guess where we have barge traffic and river traffic, that's an important aspect too.
That's and we can't ignore the air traffic either. That's another aspect that comes into play, but it's awfully difficult to say have a good rail system without looking at the road system as to whether it's going to be adequate as well.
Thank you very much, Randy Corley. I'm Don Elder for the Department of Agriculture in Washington.
Down to Earth Program 219.
American farm products are sold on the world export market in a variety of ways. With us today to talk about how other countries buy U.S. farm products is Kelly Harrison, who is the General Sales Manager for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And Kelly, how does a foreign buyer secure agricultural goods from us?
Well, first of all, they purchase those from private U.S. companies that are exporters for the most part, cooperatives and private U.S. firms. They'll purchase those on the basis of cash purchases, using conversion to dollars and purchasing with their own currency. And then they'll also use commercial credits. We also have a commercial export credit program that the Department of Agriculture provides for certain foreign buyers in certain situations, and then on concessional terms.
Let's pick up that third one you mentioned. That is the Commodity Credit Corporation, isn't it? How does that operate, and how do they buy through that program?
The Commodity Credit Corporation is the agency which has been established by the Congress to operate the price support programs of the Department of Agriculture and also to promote export of agricultural commodities. What we do is use funds borrowed through the Treasury to make credit available to foreign buyers, either private firms or governments, whereby they can purchase our commodities. In certain cases, they may not have the credit available through commercial channels. So we use that as a way to make sales where sales might not be made otherwise.
So they repay that money, and with a certain amount of interest?
Absolutely. The credit interest rates are about commercial, about the prime rate, a little bit below that, and they do pay those off within 3 years.
Do we have a large number of countries that actually buy this way?
I think we have about 30 countries that we currently are using export credits of this type with, and a level of last year of $1.6 billion worth of exports.
You mentioned concessional sales. Now, what does that entail?
Well, that's under a program where the Department of Agriculture provides longer-term credits beyond the 3 years that I mentioned, and it's to developing countries, countries that really are in a difficult situation, where they might not be able to purchase the food otherwise, but where they have an urgent need for it. And we make that available up to 40 years to pay back the credits.
This is what's often referred to as the PL 480 or Public Law 480 program.
That's
but
right.
You said that it is paid back. This is not a free food program to those countries.
That program has changed over the years, but as it's currently operating, it is a payback deal in dollars, and we're getting back, for instance, this year about $384 million of payments from loans that were made in previous years.
Do some of the countries who start under a concessional sale program kind of progress through the years to other means of buying from the U.S.?
Very definitely. We use that as a marketing tool in those countries where at a given point in time they may not be able to afford commercial purchases. We make the credits available and then they graduate. For instance, Korea and Taiwan and Japan were at one time recipients of this kind of credit.
About what percentage of purchases are made cash and then through various loans? Do you have any idea of the breakdown? Is it roughly half, or what is?
Last year, our exports were $27 billion. As I indicated, the commercial CCC credits were $1.6 billion, and credits under the PL 480 program were $800 million.
Kelly Harrison, thanks for being with us. I'm Larry Quinn with the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington.
Down to Earth Program 220.
(1978) was a record-breaking year for sale of American farm products in the world market. Will 1979 be another record-breaking year? With us to take a look at exports in 1979 today is Kelly Harrison, who is General Sales Manager for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And Kelly, sales of American farm products abroad last year went over $27 billion. Is that a record that will likely break again in '79?
We believe it is. We think we're estimating right now, based on what we've seen so far this year, $29 billion worth of exports for this coming year.
What's the basis for this continual growth in exports of American farm products?
Well, several things. First of all, world population growth, which has been growing at a rate of about 2.5% a year, and also income improvements abroad, and the fact that people want to eat better.
Are we selling more to some of the customers that we've had right along down through the years, or are we actually getting new customers for American farm products?
Well, it's kind of a mixed bag. We're selling more in most years to the same customers that have been good customers in the past. We're selling rapidly rising amounts to some new customers who are just continuing to improve the amounts that they're buying. So it's a combination of the two. The real growth, though, is in countries that have not been big buyers in the past but are coming on strong.
Kelly, you are the General Sales Manager for the Department of Agriculture. How do you get involved with export sales?
We're charged with the responsibility of exporting or causing to be exported agricultural products that are in surplus. But the major ways in which we become involved are through export credit programs and through programs of encouraging and promoting products in overseas markets through government agencies and our activities through attachés abroad.
I understand there's actually an advisory committee that works with you on export sales reporting. Just what do they do?
Well, we have an export sales reporting system which reports on a weekly basis exports as they are made, or sales as they're made, and on a daily basis those sales that exceed a certain level. This program has been criticized in the past by some who indicate that it's not complete enough. So the Secretary established an export sales reporting advisory committee which includes farmers and people who are in exporting and a variety of people representing consumers, for instance, who are looking at that system to see if it's adequate.
And are they going to make some resolution or some recommendations after they examine this, or what will be the end result?
We've held a number of hearings, public hearings, 6 around the country, and we've asked people to come and comment. We've had good response. The committee is now in its own deliberation stages. All of the meetings are open to the public, though, for people to come and listen. And they will be providing a report to Secretary Berglund at the end of January, and which will then be transmitted to Congress by the Secretary.
Could the exports of American farm products even be above what we expect at the beginning of this year?
That's possible. In fact, last year we estimated about this time we were predicting $22 billion in exports, and they went up as high as 27. So we'd like to see that happen.
Kelly Harrison, thanks for being with us. I'm Larry Quinn with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, reporting from Washington.